The knock at the door was soft but firm. Sandra had been sitting in silence, her hands clenched in her lap, the red recorder resting on the couch beside her like a ticking relic. She rose slowly and opened the front door. Detective Mendez stood on the porch, a long wool coat over his shoulders, snowflakes clinging to his thinning hair. He looked older than she remembered, grayer, heavier, but his eyes still held the same steady gaze that had made her trust him all those years ago. "You came," she said simply. "Of course I did," he replied, stepping inside. "You sounded terrified." "I am." He took in the room, the boxes, the dust of transition. "Is Edward here?" Sandra shook her head. "No, he's gone. I told him I needed space after the move. He's at his brother S." "Good," Mendez said. "I'd like to look around first, then I want you to tell me everything." She led him to the basement. He was quiet as she showed him the plastic curtain, the room beyond, the tapes, the dress, the camcorder. His breath caught audibly when he entered the pink-walled chamber. His shoulders stiffened. "God," he muttered. "He built this." Sandra said nothing. She just watched him as he walked to the shelves, scanning each label. "These tapes, did you watch any of them?" "No, I couldn't. I found them. I knew what they were." "Don't touch them," Mendez said. "We'll need a proper forensic team." He knelt to examine the tripod, adjusted the height, the angle, the direction it faced. Then he moved to the far wall where the vanity sat. His hand reached beneath it and pulled out a small pink backpack. It was faded, one strap broken, the zipper rusted. He opened it carefully. Inside, a My Little Pony figurine, a child's toothbrush, a photo. Sandra gasped when she saw it. It was a Polaroid, bent and water-stained. Izzy, unmistakably 5 years old in her favorite striped shirt, standing in front of the very same pink walls. "She was here," Sandra whispered. "She was here." Mendez stared at the photo, then at Sandra. "This is physical evidence of unlawful confinement. We need to move fast. Do you have any idea where Edward is right now?" "No," she said, though her voice faltered. "Only that he said he'd be away tonight." Mendez turned to her, his expression grave. "I want you to pack a bag and leave this house. Tonight, stay with someone you trust. I'll have officers here in the next 30 minutes with a warrant and a forensic team. But I don't want you here when Edward returns." What if he knows I found it?" "If he does, he might run," Mendez said, "or he might do worse." Sandra backed out of the room, her knees suddenly weak. She felt like the house had begun to collapse in on her. The pink walls downstairs weren't just paint, they were insulation for a lie. A lie so deep, so monstrous, it had slept beneath her for almost a decade. Back upstairs, Mendez made some quick calls, speaking in code and urgency. Sandra began to gather her things: a bag of clothes, her phone, the recorder. The moment she picked it up, it clicked in her hand. She froze. The play button had pressed slightly inward as if by accident. A low static sound began to leak from the speaker. Then, a voice, a man's voice, Edward's voice. "Princess. You know what we do when you're scared. Come sit on Daddy's lap and let me tell you a story." Sandra dropped the recorder. It clattered to the floor, still playing. Mendez crouched beside it, listening. His face was stone. "You heard that?" she asked, her voice hoarse. He nodded. "That's enough. It confirms everything. We're upgrading this to a criminal warrant immediately." A loud knock rattled the front door. They froze, another knock, harder this time, then a voice: "Sandra, it's me." "I forgot my tablet." "Edward," Mendez whispered, "go to the bedroom, lock the door, don't make a sound." "But, now?" Sandra ran. Mendez waited until she was gone, then moved to the entry hall. He stood just out of sight, gun drawn, breathing slow. The front door creaked open. Edward stepped in, brushing snow off his jacket. He paused, looked around, something was off. "Sandra?" he called, no answer. He took another step. His boot landed squarely on the red tape recorder. It squealed out another fragment. "You're my special girl. No one will ever take you away from me." Edward froze. Mendez stepped into the light, weapon raised. "Don't move." Edward's eyes widened. "Detective Mendez," he said slowly, his voice calm. "What are you doing in my house?" "Hands behind your head, now. You're making a mistake. You kept a child captive, you filmed her. You lied to your wife, to the police, to everyone." "She was my daughter," Edward said, the calm unraveling. "I was protecting her, you don't understand." "She was 5. Mendez advanced slowly. "You're under arrest for the unlawful imprisonment of a minor, sexual abuse of a minor, and obstruction of justice." Edward's hands trembled, but he raised them. "She wanted to stay." "No," Mendez said, cuffing him. "You made her believe that." Sandra heard everything from the bedroom, her back against the wall, tears silently sliding down her cheeks. The sound of Edward's voice. the man she once married, the man she once loved, twisted now beyond recognition. A monster who built a kingdom of lies beneath their feet. When the door shut behind him and the sirens began to fill the night, Sandra stood. Her legs shook, but she moved toward the window. Down in the driveway, two cruisers waited. Edward was in the back of one. Mendez stood beside it, talking into his radio. The snow was heavier now, thicker. But through it, Sandra could see one thing clearly. Edward never looked back, and that was how she knew. He had never felt shame. He had never planned to. The courtroom was colder than Sandra expected. Not physically, though the marble and glass gave the air a certain clinical chill, but spiritually. It was the kind of place where even truth felt like it had to whisper, where victims were expected to be precise, composed, never too emotional, never too angry. She sat at the edge of the front bench, hands clasped in her lap, a single photograph tucked into her purse. It was the last one taken of Izzy before that night in 1991, her fifth birthday, frosting on her nose, paper crown crooked on her head. Sandra had studied it every day since rediscovering it, trying to freeze in her mind the exact sound of that laugh, the way her daughter used to squint when smiling too hard. Izzy wasn't in court that morning. The therapists had agreed she wasn't ready. Sandra had fought the guilt that came with that decision, but it had been necessary. After all, had Izzy already been forced to endure enough? To sit behind a table, answering questions from strangers about her own stolen life, would be another kind of prison. No, Sandra would speak. She would become the voice that her daughter couldn't yet summon. The trial had moved swiftly. The evidence, dozens of videotapes, floor plans, forensic results, the hidden room, was undeniable. Edward had pled not guilty on all counts, his lawyer citing mental instability, childhood trauma, delusional thinking. But the court wasn't swayed. The jury didn't need psychiatric lectures to see the monster behind the curtain. They only needed to watch a single tape, just one, and everything that had once been murky became crystal clear. Still, Sandra was called to the stand. The prosecutor guided her gently. Questions about her marriage, the day Izzy vanished, the guilt that followed, the recording toy that brought it all back, and finally, the basement. She answered everything with the same steady tone she had practiced at night, long after Izzy had fallen asleep in her hospital bed. Each word felt like walking barefoot across broken glass, but she said them anyway, because truth, once locked away, only healed when spoken aloud. Then came the defense. The man in the suit was younger than Edward, smoother, sharper. His questions weren't cruel, but they were surgical. Mrs. Rhodes, would you say your husband was ever physically violent toward you? No. Did he ever display signs of instability before your daughter disappeared? Not outwardly, but that's the thing about abusers, isn't it? They hide it, they blend in. Understood, he said, voice almost kind. But you lived in that house for years after. You never noticed a secret room, you never heard anything. I worked nights, he reinforced the walls. He made it invisible by design. And you never suspected. Never wondered, after all this time, that maybe you'd missed something. The question wasn't designed to uncover truth, it was designed to plant doubt. Sandra looked across the courtroom. Edward sat with his hands folded, staring at her, not defiantly, but serenely, as if he still expected her to understand. As if this was all just a misunderstanding between two people who had once shared a bed. She turned back to the defense attorney. No, she said. I didn't suspect because I trusted him, because I never believed a person could be that sick, that patient, that cruel, but I know now, and I carry that guilt every day. I missed what mattered most, but please don't confuse my blindness for consent. I was his victim too. I just didn't know I was inside the prison. There was silence in the courtroom. The defense attorney nodded, closing his folder. No further questions. When she stepped down from the stand, her legs almost gave out. But she didn't fall. She walked back to her seat and sat down beside the detective, Mendez, who gave her a small nod of quiet respect. The verdict came the next day, guilty on all counts. The judge read the sentence aloud, life without parole, but even that didn't feel like justice, not fully, because nothing, no sentence, no punishment, could return the years stolen from Izzy. Nothing could rewind time to 1991 and unopen that window, unbuild that room, unscar her body and her mind. Still, it was something. That night, back at their new home, Sandra made hot cocoa the way Izzy used to like it. Extra marshmallows, no cinnamon. Izzy sat curled on the couch beneath a weighted blanket, the cat she'd adopted 2 months ago asleep beside her. She didn't speak much these days, but she smiled more. Some nights, she even laughed at TV shows. She still hadn't asked to return to school, and that was okay. Sandra had stopped measuring progress by the calendar. Healing had its own strange rhythm. Izzy turned to her. Mom. Yes, sweetie. When he goes to sleep, do you think he dreams? Sandra set down her mug. The question caught her like a stone in the throat. I don't know, she said honestly. But if he does, I hope they haunt him. Izzy looked down at her hands. I used to dream about you, every night. You were always running, but you never heard me calling. Sandra reached over and took her hand. I hear you now, every word, every silence. Izzy leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. Do you think I'll ever feel real again? She whispered. Sandra didn't have an easy answer, but she gave the only one she could. You already are, the world just needs time to see it again, and you'll help them when you're ready. Outside, the snow had stopped. The stars were out. And somewhere in a cell too bright to dream, Edward Rhodes was awake, alone with his darkness. But in this quiet living room, something small and impossible had begun to take root. Not revenge, not rage, but the first fragile shape of peace.